The cemetery was almost empty that morning. A thin layer of fog drifted just above the headstones, and the ground was still wet from last night's rain. The trees stood motionless, as if holding their breath, and the only sound that echoed across the silence was the soft scrape of a rag being wrung out. She was there again, just like she always was, bent low, her back curved like a question mark, her hands gently polishing the marble headstone with a tenderness that felt out of place in such a cold, lifeless place. Her coat was old, threadbare at the cuffs, and her shoes were soaked through from the damp grass, but she didn't seem to notice. She was humming softly, a tune that was almost too gentle to hear, as if it belonged to another time. It was the 27th week in a row. She came every Tuesday, rain or shine, sometimes before dawn, sometimes with a single white lily, other times with nothing but her worn-out rag and her quiet, aching presence. And today he saw her. From behind the tinted windows of his black sedan, the billionaire leaned forward. His driver had paused at the edge of the cemetery, expecting him to give the signal to turn back, as he always did. But today he didn't. "Wait," he murmured. His voice was hoarse, as if it hadn't been used for anything personal in years. He had buried his wife 2 years ago. Private funeral. No press. No tears, at least not in public. Just a few cold handshakes, a speech that meant nothing, and a promise to never return. Grief was something he outsourced to lawyers, maids, and silence. But now something drew him back. He stepped out of the car. The cold air hit his chest like a punch, but he didn't flinch. His shoes sank slightly into the wet grass. Step by step, he moved toward her. The woman who'd been scrubbing his wife's grave. She didn't look up, didn't flinch, as if she had been expecting him. Not today, not this hour, but eventually. Her fingers moved gently over the letters on the tombstone. First name, last name, then the dates. She traced them like they were sacred. He cleared his throat. Still, she didn't look up. "What are you doing here?" he asked. His tone was hard, too sharp, a reflex from a life where softness had been punished, where everything had a price, and everyone had a motive. She looked up now, slowly. Her eyes were tired, but not defeated. Her face was plain, but not forgettable. And around her neck, dangling like a secret, was a silver necklace. Caught the light just enough to make him blink. "This is my job," she said quietly. "I clean graves." He narrowed his eyes. "But why this one?" She said nothing. Instead, she stood up, brushed the dirt from her knees, and for the first time, looked him square in the face. There was no fear in her gaze, just sadness, the kind that didn't demand pity, but dared you to look away. "Because someone had to," she said, "and no one else came." He looked at the headstone, then back at her, and for a moment, something cracked in his chest. A soundless snap, a shift in the ground beneath everything he thought he knew. "Who are you?" She hesitated, and then gently, like placing a feather on water, she touched his arm. Her fingers were cold, her voice even colder. "I can't tell you that," she whispered. "Not yet." And just like that, she walked away. No explanation, no answers, just the faint glimmer of that necklace swinging back and forth as she disappeared down the path between the graves. A necklace he had seen before, a necklace he once gave to his wife. He stood frozen. The fog thickened. In that moment, he didn't feel like a billionaire. He felt like a man who had just glimpsed a ghost. And deep down, in the quiet parts of himself he had long buried, he knew something was wrong. Something was coming. And this was only the beginning. He didn't sleep that night. Not because of the cold air that still clung to his coat, or the image of the woman's pale fingers brushing the granite. Not even because of the necklace, though it haunted him more than he could admit. It was something deeper, something older, something he thought was buried. He sat in the darkened living room of his penthouse, surrounded by glass and chrome and silence. Below him, the city blinked like 1,000 artificial stars. But inside the room, inside him, there was nothing, just emptiness. He picked up a picture frame from the table. It was dusty. He hadn't touched it in years. In the photo, he was younger, smiling, with his arms around a woman who glowed like morning sunlight. Her name was Isabel, his wife, his only family. She had died quietly, a long illness, the kind that didn't make headlines, but shattered lives in silence. When the doctors gave her 3 months, she lasted only 2. And when she passed, she took more than her last breath. She took the last of his softness with her. But now there was that necklace. He remembered it clearly. A delicate silver chain with a tiny pendant, a crescent moon holding a single sapphire. He had given it to Isabel on their first anniversary, when they still laughed together, when love didn't feel like a liability. He never saw it again after the night she left. That was the part no one knew. They weren't together when she died. He had driven her away. It was winter, cold and bitter. Their arguments had turned violent. Not with hands, but with words sharp enough to scar. She said he'd changed, that he cared more about mergers than memories, that she didn't recognize the man he'd become. And he accused her of betrayal. He told her to leave. She packed a small bag, took nothing but a coat, a few books, and that necklace. She didn't ask for money. She didn't cry. She just walked out the door, looked back once and said, "One day, you'll wish you asked the right questions." He never did. Until now. He stood up suddenly, heart racing, opened the drawer of his old oak desk. Inside, beneath a stack of contracts and forgotten pens, was a small wooden box. He hadn't opened it in years. He did now. Inside was a letter, unopened, yellowing at the edges. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. To James, if you ever care enough to open it. His hands trembled. He unfolded it slowly, careful not to tear the edges. The letter was brief, but every word sliced through him like ice. "James, by the time you read this, I'll probably be gone. But I need you to know something. There are things I couldn't say then, things I wish I'd screamed. I never betrayed you, and I didn't leave alone. One day someone might come to you. You'll recognize them not by their face, but by what they carry. When that day comes, don't ask why. Ask what you missed. Isabel." He read it again, and again. Every line a riddle, every word a wound. He looked up slowly, toward the window, toward the cemetery far in the distance beyond the skyline. There was no denying it now. That woman, whoever she was connected to Isabel. And that necklace? It wasn't just jewelry. It was the start of a truth he had never dared to face. He had money. He had power. He had everything. Except the one thing Isabel tried to give him. And now, 20 years too late, he realized what that was. Love. Real love. Unconditional. Unpaid for. Unprotected. And maybe, just maybe, it had returned. In the shape of a woman with tired eyes and a rag in her hand, wiping dirt off the past. James leaned forward, pressed the intercom. "Paul," he said to his driver, voice thick. "Yes, sir. Tomorrow morning. First thing. Take me back to the cemetery." A pause. "Yes, sir." He hung up, and for the first time in years, James sat back in his chair and whispered out loud, "What did I miss, Isabel?" The house she lived in wasn't a house at all. It was a room, just one, and even calling it that felt generous. Peeling paint, a cracked window sealed with tape, and a floor that creaked with every step. The mattress she slept on used to be a couch cushion. The stove barely worked, and the only running water came from a bathroom down the hall, shared with 3 other tenants who barely spoke English. But she kept it clean, impossibly clean, because that was all she could control. Her name was Elena. She was 29 but looked older. Life had taken pieces of her in quiet, merciless ways. Never all at once, just slowly, like dripping water carving stone. One missed paycheck, one betrayal, one death, and then everything changed. She wasn't always like this. There was a time she had dreams, small ones, gentle ones, a nursing certificate, a studio apartment, a baby girl who would call her Mama in the sweetest voice. But life, as it often does, had other plans. Her mother died when she was just 12. Her father, never in the picture. She spent her teenage years in shelters, moving from one foster home to another, carrying everything she owned in a single duffel bag. No birthdays, No holidays, just survival. At 18, she met someone. He said the right things, promised her stability, the future. He gave her a child. And then he left. She was 5 months pregnant. No note.
No explanation.
Just silence. The little girl, Maya, became her whole world. Every bottle she warmed, every lullaby she hummed, was sung with a voice that cracked from exhaustion but never from resentment. But the universe wasn't finished with her. 3 winters ago, Maya got sick. A fever that wouldn't break. A diagnosis too big for Elena to understand. Doctors said words like genetic and rare. They said treatments. They said tests. They didn't say hope. Maya died wrapped in a blue blanket. Elena held her for hours, unable to put her down. When she finally did, her arms ached for weeks. But her heart would never stop aching. She stopped dreaming after that. Stopped talking, too. Until one rainy afternoon, when she walked past the cemetery on her way to the diner. Something stopped her. Pull she couldn't explain. Her shoes soaked through. Her coat thin. But she wandered in, almost like something or someone was guiding her. She didn't know the names on the tombstones, but one of them called to her.
Isabel de Bereux.
1959 to 2004. Beloved wife. The stone was clean. Fresh flowers sat in a vase. But something about it felt forgotten. Not unloved. Just lost in time. She didn't know why she knelt beside it. Why she began to speak. Why she found herself whispering her story to a woman she had never met. But she did. Every week. For almost 2 years. No one ever noticed. No one ever thanked her. Sometimes she brought a small flower. Sometimes just a cloth. But always she spoke. And somehow, it helped. Not much, but enough. Enough to get her through the days. Enough to feel like she still existed. One morning, as she knelt to clean the stone, she noticed something different. A man, tall, sharp suit, gray temples, watching from a distance. He didn't approach, just stood there, staring. She didn't know who he was. She didn't know he was James Devereux. She didn't know that her quiet act of remembrance had just shattered the world of the man who once believed no one remembered his wife at all. And around her neck, tucked under her threadbare scarf, was a necklace. A simple silver chain, with a crescent moon, and one tiny sapphire. Elena didn't know where her mother had gotten it. She didn't even know her mother's full story. But she remembered the words her mom whispered the night before she died. If you ever meet someone who recognizes this, listen to what they don't say. Elena never forgot that. She just never thought it would matter. Not until now. Not until the man with the haunted eyes looked at her like he was staring at a ghost. Not until he came back the next day and stood beside her and said nothing. But in his silence, she heard everything. The next morning, the sky was heavy with clouds, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. Elena stood in the same place she always did, kneeling before Isabel Devereux's grave, gloved hands gently wiping away the dew from the marble. Her movements were slow, intentional, reverent, but she wasn't alone. She could feel it before she even looked up. That same presence, the same quiet tension. James stood a few feet away, hands buried in his coat pockets, eyes unreadable. He didn't speak, didn't move. He just stood there watching. Elena didn't ask why. She didn't have the energy to question fate. Instead, she reached for her small bouquet, white lilies today, Maya's favorite, and placed them at the base of the stone. She traced the engraved letters with her fingers. Beloved wife. For the first time, James spoke. You do this every week. His voice was gravel and grief, polished yet fraying around the edges. Elena nodded once, still facing the stone. Yes. He hesitated. Why? She didn't answer right away. How could she explain that sometimes the dead are the only ones who listen? That sometimes you need to take care of someone else's grief just to survive your own? Instead, she said softly, because no one else did. A long silence stretched between them. Then James stepped closer. Closer than he'd been yesterday. Elena turned her head slightly, finally meeting his gaze. There was something behind his eyes, an old storm, unspoken and unresolved. His jaw clenched, his fingers twitched like he wanted to speak, but didn't know how. Then he noticed it, the necklace. It peeked out from beneath her scarf as she stood, catching the weak morning light. His breath hitched, just slightly, but she saw it, felt it. His eyes locked on the pendant. "Where did you get that?" he asked, voice low, trembling. Not from fear, but recognition. Elena's hand instinctively reached up, fingers curling protectively around the charm. "It was my mother's," she said. James took another step, now barely a foot away. "Did she ever tell you where it came from?" Elena shook her head. "Only that it mattered. That if someone ever recognized it, I should listen." He didn't speak again. Not with words, but his eyes. They screamed. Memories surged in his mind like a dam breaking. A warm summer night. A woman laughing beside him. Fireflies in the vineyard. The necklace shining under the moonlight as he fastened it around her neck. A promise whispered, "Always. Even when you hate me. Always." His chest tightened. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out something wrapped in a velvet cloth. Slowly, with fingers that shook more than he wanted, he unwrapped it. Another necklace. Identical. The same crescent moon. The same single sapphire. He held it up, letting it dangle between them. Elena's heart stopped. Two halves of a story neither of them fully understood. James whispered, more to himself than to her. "She wore it the night she left." Elena stepped back, eyes wide. "What was her name?" he asked, suddenly desperate. "Your mother. What was her name?" Elena's voice cracked. "Valerie. Valerie Gray." James turned pale. The color drained from his face as though someone had opened a trapdoor beneath his feet. He stumbled back a step, grasping for the tombstone to steady himself. "No," he breathed. "It can't be." Elena didn't understand. Not yet. She watched him fumble for his phone, scroll through something with shaking hands, and then freeze. He held out the screen to her. A photo. A woman. Smiling. Pregnant. Wearing the same necklace. Elena took the phone with trembling fingers. She didn't need to ask. She didn't need a DNA test. She didn't even need to blink. Because she was looking at a younger version of herself. Standing beside the man now breaking down in front of her. Her voice was barely a whisper. "You knew her." James didn't respond. He couldn't. His entire world had just tilted on its axis. She had her mother's eyes. She had her mother's necklace. And he had once loved Valerie Gray more than anything. Until he let her go. Until pride ruined everything. And now this girl, this stranger, might be the last living piece of the woman he lost. Neither of them spoke after that. They just stood there, bound by something far deeper than words. The air around them was still. But inside both hearts, something had started to move. Something ancient. Something aching. Something that refused to stay buried. The next day, the wind whispered through the trees like an old memory. The cemetery was quieter than usual, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Elena didn't bring flowers this time. She didn't clean the grave. She just stood there, still unsure, heart pounding louder than the silence around her. And he came. James, the man whose life had been built on certainty, now shaken to its core. He didn't walk like a powerful CEO today. He walked like a man dragging a lifetime of regrets behind him. There were no bodyguards, no chauffeur, no coat worth more than some people made in a year. Just James, alone, as if shedding everything else might bring him closer to the truth. Their eyes met before he said a word. And for a moment, it was as if time bent around them. Two strangers pulled together by something neither of them could name. She was the first to speak. "Why didn't she tell you?" James exhaled hard, almost a laugh, almost a sob. "Because I wouldn't have listened." He stepped closer, the wind tugging gently at his coat. "Valerie was the only woman who ever saw me for who I was, not what I had. I ruined that."
Elena blinked.
Her throat tightened. "She told me never to hate you." His face broke. That one sentence cracked something deep inside him. His knees gave slightly, and he sat, right there on the cold stone bench next to his wife's grave. He covered his face with his hands, trying to stop the memories from swallowing him whole. "She left the night I accused her of lying," he said softly. "I told her the child wasn't mine. I told her I wanted a divorce. She didn't even pack a bag. Just took the necklace and left." Elena's voice quivered. "You thought she cheated?" "I was a coward," James admitted. "I couldn't have children. I was sterile. Doctors told me. And then she got pregnant." He looked up at her now, eyes red. "I thought it was impossible. I thought she betrayed me." Elena stepped closer, her hands folded tight over her chest. "My mother said I was a miracle," she whispered. "She never told me why." James nodded slowly. "Because she wanted to protect you from me." A silence stretched between them, thick and sacred. And then, quietly, Elena sat beside him. No anger, no judgment, just presence. "I used to come here," she said after a long pause, "because it was the only place that felt like home." James turned to her. "This grave." She nodded. "I didn't know who she was at first, but something drew me in. Like, I belonged." "You did," he said. "More than you'll ever know." He reached into his coat again, but this time not for a necklace or a phone. He pulled out an envelope, weathered at the edges, sealed in wax. "She wrote this the night she left," he said. "I never opened it." Elena took it with trembling hands. The name on the front was written in cursive. "To James, for when you're ready." She opened it slowly, careful not to tear the paper, as if it might vanish like a dream if she moved too fast. Inside was a letter, a single page. She read it aloud, her voice quiet and steady. "James, I know you don't believe me, and maybe you never will, but I am not leaving in anger. I'm leaving in love, because I can't stay where love is replaced by suspicion. This child, our child, is yours, not by blood alone, but by the choice we made to be a family, long before doctors and doubts. If you ever find her, and I pray you do, love her the way you once loved me." Tears slipped down Elena's cheeks as she read. Her voice broke at the end. James didn't speak. He didn't need to. He just reached for her hand, and she didn't pull away. The grave between them wasn't just a monument to a lost woman. It was a bridge, a thread connecting pain, memory, and the fragile possibility of something new. "I don't know what to do," James finally said. Elena looked at him through tearful eyes. "Neither do I," she replied. "But I think maybe we start by not walking away." He nodded slowly. The wind picked up again, carrying the scent of lilies and old earth. And for the first time in 20 years, James didn't feel alone at that grave. He felt seen. As they sat in silence, side by side, something began to shift. Not loudly, not all at once, but gently, like morning light seeping through a closed curtain. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet, but it was something close. The beginning of a sentence long left unfinished. They didn't speak much after that day. Not because there was nothing to say, there was too much. Words couldn't reach where the hurt lived. Not yet. So they let silence do what language couldn't, hold space. But James couldn't stay away. The next morning, he returned to the cemetery. No driver, no suit, just him again. He brought with him something he hadn't touched in decades. An old wooden box, locked for 20 years, buried beneath paperwork and regret. He found her where he expected, kneeling before the grave, carefully brushing away dead leaves from the marble letters. Her hands moved with tenderness, the kind reserved for those we miss too deeply to speak of. She turned when she heard his footsteps. He didn't say hello. He just sat beside her, opened the box and held it out. Inside was the original necklace, the twin to the one she wore around her neck. The same design, the same engraved initials. Forever, J. She stared at it for a long moment, as if the past were staring back at her through that delicate piece of silver. "My mother never let me take this off," she said softly, touching the one around her own neck. "She said it was a reminder of who I am, even if I didn't know what that meant. James stared at her with eyes filled with storms. She kept both. I didn't even realize. The day she left, she wore hers. I had this one made after our anniversary. It was meant to be a surprise. He paused. I never gave it to her. Elena gently lifted the necklace from the box and held it next to her own. Two identical pieces, meant to be worn as a pair. Meant to connect two hearts. They were never meant to be separated, she whispered. Neither were we, James thought, but he didn't say it aloud. Instead, he asked, Can I show you something? She hesitated, then nodded. They left the cemetery and drove in silence. He took her through winding hills until they reached a large, ivy-covered estate. The gates opened as if sensing his presence. Elena had never seen a place so beautiful or so empty. This was our home, he said as they pulled up to a house that looked like it belonged in a painting, majestic, elegant, yet hollow. We built it together. Every wall, every painting, every light. We chose it all. Inside it was cold, pristine but lifeless, like time had stopped when she left. James led her to a room on the second floor. The door creaked when he opened it. Dust had settled on the furniture, and a thin veil covered a cradle that had never been used. This was supposed to be your room, he said quietly. Before everything fell apart, Elena stepped in like she was walking through a dream someone else had tried to forget. The walls were painted a soft lavender. In the corner sat a rocking chair, untouched, and a pile of unopened books. Fairy tales, lullabies, stories that had no reader. Why didn't you clean it up? She asked. James sighed. I couldn't move on, couldn't let go. So I just closed the door. He ran his hand along the crib. I thought I'd been betrayed, that everything was a lie. But now, I realize I was the one who lied to myself. I chose fear over love. Elena didn't answer. She stepped to the window and looked out over the garden below. It's beautiful, she said, voice almost a whisper. But it doesn't feel like it was ever mine. James nodded slowly. That's because you never got to live it. And I never got to deserve it. She turned to him. Why now? She asked. Why come back to the grave? After all these years? His voice cracked. Because something in me broke. And when something breaks that deeply, it either kills you or forces you to look at the pieces. He walked toward her. And one of those pieces was you. A pause stretched between them, heavy but sacred. She looked at the necklaces again. One was supposed to be for her, she said. And one, for who? James met her gaze. For our daughter. The word landed like thunder in a quiet sky. She didn't flinch. Instead, she reached behind her neck and unfastened her necklace. Then, gently, she took the other from the box and placed them both on the dresser. They've been together this whole time, she said. Just not in the same place. He swallowed hard, voice low. Until now. And for the first time since they met, she smiled. Not fully, not freely, but just enough to say, I'm still here. That evening, as the sun set in shades of gold and wine, James drove her back to town. Neither spoke, but the silence was no longer empty. It was full with memory, with longing, with something that almost felt like hope. Before she stepped out of the car, he said, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't want you to feel alone anymore. She paused with her hand on the door handle. I've been alone my whole life, she said softly. But for the first time, I'm not sure I have to be. And then she was gone, disappearing into the evening light like a ghost finally allowed to rest. But something had changed. The world hadn't shifted. They had, and that was enough. For now. James didn't sleep that night. Not really. He sat in the armchair by the window, watching the sky move from darkness to the bruised purple of dawn, then into pale gold. Everything outside changed. Inside, nothing did, except him. There was a soft knock at the door just after 8. He thought it might be her, though he knew better than to hope that fast. Instead, it was his housekeeper, the same woman who had served the family for over 25 years. She looked at him cautiously, holding something small in her wrinkled hands. "I found this tucked behind the nursery bookshelf," she said. "I don't know how it got there, but it has her handwriting." She handed him a sealed envelope, the edges yellowed with time. James froze. On the front, in his wife's unmistakable script, were 4 words. "For when he's ready." His fingers trembled. He opened it slowly, like someone peeling back time. Inside was a single letter. "James, if you're reading this, it means you've come back. Maybe not to me, but to the truth. You pushed me away before I could show you, before I could explain. I know you didn't believe the baby was yours. I know your pride was louder than your love that day. But I never lied. I left not because I wanted to, but because you left me no choice. I had to protect her, our daughter, from your anger, from the pain you carried and refused to name. I wanted to stay. God knows I did. But I was afraid you'd ruin her the way you let the world ruin you. If you're still angry, keep it. If you're grieving, let it carry you. But if there's even one piece of you left that remembers how to love, then find her. Let her know she wasn't a mistake. Let her know she was wanted. Her name is Elena. She has your eyes, James, and sometimes I think your heart. There was no date, no goodbye, just a name that hit like thunder and wrapped around his chest like fire. He dropped the letter to his lap and buried his face in his hands. He'd known. Somewhere inside, he'd always known. But knowing and accepting are different kinds of grief. Elena, his daughter, the word felt too big for his mouth, too holy for someone who had done what he did. He sat there for hours, rereading every line until the paper felt like skin, until her words became his guilt, and his guilt became something worse, understanding. That night, he went back to the cemetery. Elena was already there, sitting under the same oak tree, legs curled beneath her, eyes red but dry. She didn't look surprised to see him. "Thought you might come," she said. James nodded, lowering himself beside her. "I got your mother's letter." She didn't speak, but her face twitched, almost like she'd been waiting for him to say that exact sentence her entire life. "She named you," he continued. "She gave you the name we once promised each other we'd use if we ever had a daughter." Elena's lips parted slightly, then closed again. He handed her the letter. She didn't take it. Instead, she asked, "Do you believe her now?" "I believe her more than I've ever believed anything." A long pause. "I don't know what you want from me," she said, voice low. "I don't know if you're here because of guilt or love, or just some twisted sense of unfinished business." He looked at her, really looked, and saw in her all the things he never allowed himself to see in the mirror. Honesty, pain, strength. "I'm not here to fix anything," he said. "I know I can't. I just want to stop running." She finally looked back at him, and her eyes were glassy. Not from tears, from exhaustion, the kind of soul-deep weariness that no child should carry. "I used to dream you'd come find me," she admitted. "But in my dreams, you looked different. Softer. Kinder. Less lost." James inhaled sharply. "I was lost," he said. "Still am most days. But I want to be found." The wind rustled the grass around them, lifting old petals from the grave, the kind she left every week. "What did you do all those years?" she asked. "When you thought we were gone?" "I buried myself in money," he said. "In buildings, meetings, power. None of it touched the ache. Nothing ever did." He paused, then added, "Until now." She looked down at her hands. "I'm not a replacement for her. I know. And I'm not a symbol for your redemption arc. I know. I'm a person, James, not your second chance." He nodded slowly. "But you are the only part of her I have left, and the only part of me I haven't destroyed." A silence thicker than grief fell between them. Then she asked, "Why didn't she tell me?" James didn't know how to answer, so she answered for him. "She was afraid. That's what mothers do. They carry the fear so their children don't have to." She finally took the letter and held it close to her chest. Then, out of nowhere, she asked, "What was her laugh like?" James blinked. "She had 3 kinds of laughs," he said. smiling despite himself. One for people she barely liked. One for jokes that weren't really funny. And one for when she forgot the world. "That's the one I miss," Elena whispered. The laugh that sounded like hope. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small device. Pressed play. From the speaker, a soft, recorded voice floated out. A woman's laughter. Full, unfiltered. Oh, Elena's breath hitched. "That's her," she said. "That's the one." James nodded. "I used to play it in secret. The only thing I kept." And for the first time they cried together. Not over what was lost, but over what remained, and what might still be found. The next morning came with rain. Not the kind that washes things away, but the kind that lingers, soft, persistent, like the world was mourning something only it understood. James stood at the threshold of the cemetery again, umbrella in hand, but unmoved by the drizzle. His eyes scanned the rows of headstones until he saw her, Elena, kneeling beside the grave, brushing away leaves from her mother's name. She didn't look up when he approached. She didn't have to. She felt him. He waited beside her in silence, letting the rain settle over them like a shared confession. "I read the letter again last night," she finally said. "The one she left you." James nodded. "I did too." There was a beat of stillness. Then, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a worn, leather-bound journal. The edges were curled, the cover faded, but James instantly recognized the handwriting on the first page. His breath caught. "She kept this," Elena said, placing it in his hands. "It's her journal. I found it tucked inside the box she told me never to open unless I met you." James opened it slowly, as if unwrapping a secret with bare hands. Each page was a window. Her handwriting danced across the paper, looping and slanting in the way it always did when she was trying to stay calm. He flipped through entries, some angry, others tender, some filled with doubt, others with hope. But one entry near the middle stopped him cold. "I saw him today, across the street. He didn't see me, or maybe he did and just didn't care. He looked older, sadder. I wanted to run to him, show him the photo of Elena, tell him she's his. But fear held me back again. He always said he never wanted a child. And now I'm afraid I'm proving him right." James clenched the book. His throat tightened. "I didn't mean that," he whispered, mostly to himself. "God, I didn't mean that." Elena said nothing. She let the silence speak. Sometimes that was louder than words. He turned another page. "Elena asked me today if her father was brave. I lied. I told her yes." His knees buckled. He sat down in the wet grass, no longer caring about the dampness seeping through his trousers. He looked up at Elena, rain dripping from his brow. "She lied for me. She protected you," Elena said softly, "even when you didn't deserve it." James nodded, eyes glassy. "That's who she was. That's who I lost." There was a pause before Elena asked, "Do you want to know what she told me before she died?" He looked at her. She said, "One day you'll see him, and he won't recognize you. But you'll know it's him because your heart will shake." James exhaled like the wind had been knocked out of him. "It did," Elena said. "When I saw you that day, I didn't understand it. I was angry, confused, but I felt it." She looked at him, really looked. "And when I saw you hold that necklace, I knew she wasn't lying. Not about you. Not about me." James reached into his coat and pulled the necklace from his inner pocket, the small silver locket that had started everything. He held it in his palm, glistening with rain. "I gave this to her the night I proposed," he said. "She wore it every day, and I buried her with it." Elena's eyes didn't move. "She took it off before the funeral, gave it to me, said, 'This is for the day you need proof of who you are.'" He looked down at the locket, then back at her. Inside it was a tiny photo, faded, black and white, of him and his wife, cheek to cheek, smiling. He hadn't smiled like that in decades. James clutched the locket tight. "I wasted everything," he said. "Time, trust, her." Elena's voice cracked. "You didn't waste me. Not if you're here now. Their eyes met again. No longer strangers. No longer bound by guilt alone. Then James did something unexpected. He took off his wedding ring. He held it in his hand, staring at the simple band that had meant everything and nothing all at once. And then, gently, he placed it beside the grave. "She deserved better," he whispered. Elena reached out, placing her hand over his. "She wanted you to forgive yourself." That's what she wrote in the last page. James looked at her. She said, "He's not perfect, but neither was I. If he ever comes back, tell him this. Love doesn't expire. It just waits in silence." The words wrapped around him like a second chance. He stood slowly, extending a hand toward Elena. She stared at it for a long moment. Then she took it, and in that touch, the final wall crumbled. He didn't need to be her hero. He just needed to be her father. As they walked away from the grave together, the rain began to lift. The clouds parted ever so slightly, and sunlight leaked through like a whispered promise. They didn't speak. They didn't have to, because some stories don't end with declarations. They end with forgiveness, and the quiet, brave decision to begin again. James had returned home, but it didn't feel like home. Not anymore. He stood at the center of his grand penthouse apartment. Glass walls overlooking a city he had once dominated. The lights of New York blinked in the distance, but he didn't notice them. Not tonight. Tonight, the silence was deafening. His coat was still damp from the rain, but he didn't take it off. He just stood there, staring at the framed photo on the table. One of the only pictures he had left of her. His wife, young, beautiful, full of light. He touched the glass with trembling fingers, tracing her smile. For years, he had convinced himself she'd betrayed him, that her leaving was cowardice, that her silence meant guilt. But now he knew. She had carried the truth alone. She had protected their daughter from his pride, his arrogance, his absence. And in doing so, she saved something he didn't even know he had. He sank onto the edge of the couch, holding her journal in his hands again. The pages were still slightly warped from the rain, but her words remained intact. He read them slowly this time, letting each syllable break him further open. "If he ever comes back, I hope he's different. I hope time has softened him. I hope he's learned that love isn't a weakness." He closed his eyes. Time hadn't softened him. It had hollowed him out. But maybe that was the same thing. Maybe that's how change begins. James stood and walked into the next room. A room that had been locked for almost 2 decades. It was dusty, untouched like a time capsule. He flipped the light on. The chandelier flickered above as if uncertain it was allowed to shine again. It was her room. He had never gotten rid of it. Not really. The books she loved still lined the shelves. Her perfume lingered faintly in the air, or maybe it was his memory playing tricks on him. The piano stood untouched in the corner. The keys, like bones, still waiting to be heard. James walked over and sat down. He placed his fingers on the keys, hesitated, then played the first notes of the song she used to hum while cooking. It was clumsy, broken, but it was something. He stopped. The sound echoed through the empty apartment like a ghost returning home. He wiped his eyes. Enough waiting. He picked up the phone. "Travis," he said when his assistant answered. "Find out everything about Elena's school, housing, her sister if she has one. I want to make sure she has everything she needs. Quietly. No press. No headlines. Just do it right." "Yes, sir," Travis replied, stunned. "Are you sure?" James paused. "No," he said, "but I'm ready." He ended the call and stood at the window again. He thought about what she must have gone through, growing up without a father, without knowing the truth, without security, and still she had returned to her mother's grave every week. Still, she had carried herself with dignity. Still, she had spoken those 3 words to him without hatred. "You are him. Not I hate you. Not where were you. Just the truth." And it shattered him. He walked to the drawer of his study, the one he hadn't opened since the day she left. Inside were old letters, business cards, photos, and the ultrasound image. The one he had refused to believe. The one he had said was fake. He picked it up, and for the first time he let it matter. He let it be real. He whispered to no one, "I missed your first words. I missed your first steps. I missed the way your eyes lit up when you read your first book. I missed everything." His voice cracked. "But I won't miss the rest." James turned and walked back into the hallway. His steps were slow but purposeful. There was something he needed to do, not to fix everything, but to begin again. That night he sat down and wrote a letter. Not to Elena, to her mother. He started it with shaking hands. "I was wrong. I let my fear become anger, my pride become cruelty, and when you needed me most, I became a stranger. But she didn't. She became everything." He wrote for hours, pouring out the confessions he had buried in stone. He wrote until the sun began to rise over the skyline. He sealed the letter, walked to the cemetery before the city awoke, and laid it gently beside her grave. Then he sat. No words, no excuses, just presence. The wind moved through the trees above him like her voice calling from a softer place. "I don't deserve forgiveness," he whispered. But in the breeze, in the morning light, he felt something shift. Not forgiveness, but permission. Permission to try. When he stood again, he felt lighter. Not healed, not whole, but human. And sometimes that was more than enough. As he turned to leave, he saw her standing by the gate. Elena, hair pulled back, hoodie soaked from the rain that had begun again. They looked at each other. He didn't speak. Neither did she. But she walked toward him. And he waited. When they met halfway, he held out an umbrella. She took it. They walked side by side down the cemetery path, the past behind them, the future still uncertain, but theirs to write. Together. The rain had finally stopped. It wasn't sudden. It was slow, almost gentle, like the sky had finally run out of tears. The sun began to peek through the clouds as if unsure whether it was welcome. But on that morning it was. James stood at the edge of the small garden that bordered the cemetery gates. Beside him, Elena sat on the worn bench where her mother used to read to her. They hadn't said much since that morning. The morning he gave her the umbrella, the morning they walked silently, side by side. But some silences don't need to be broken. Some speak louder than any apology ever could. She clutched a warm cup of tea he'd handed her without a word. She hadn't thanked him. He hadn't expected her to. They were still two people standing in the ruins of something neither had built but both had inherited. And yet, here they were. James cleared his throat. He wasn't used to saying personal things aloud. He'd built his empire with numbers, contracts, and boardroom dominance. Not words from the heart. But this wasn't business anymore. "I cleared out the study," he said softly. "All her things are still there, if you'd like to see them. Some photos, her favorite books, even that old scarf she wore everywhere. Still smells like her perfume." Elena looked up at him. Her eyes were quiet, searching. "I wasn't sure if it was too much," he added, "or too little." She didn't answer right away. She just stared at the cup in her hands, steam curling upward like smoke from a long-extinguished fire. "I've never had a bedroom of my own," she said suddenly. "Not really. Always shared with my sister or the other girls. But I used to dream of one. I'd imagine what kind of lamp I'd have, what color the walls would be. Stupid, right?" James shook his head. "It's not stupid." She looked at him again. This time, her expression softened just enough to let a sliver of trust through. "Then maybe," she said quietly, "maybe I could see the room. Just once." He nodded, a lump rising in his throat. "I want you to have it," he said. "Not just see it. It's yours, Elena, if you'll let it be." For the first time, she smiled. It was faint, hesitant, but real. A few hours later, the limousine pulled up to the building she'd only seen on TV before. His penthouse tower overlooking the entire city. He didn't walk ahead of her. He walked beside her. Through the marble-floored lobby. Past the silent concierge, up the elevator that opened directly into the apartment. She stepped in like someone entering a dream they'd once let go of. The room wasn't perfect. It hadn't been repainted or made new. It was exactly as her mother had left it. Soft blues, lace curtains, a bookshelf full of stories about forgiveness, love, and loss. And on the bed, a folded scarf, pale lavender, still smelling faintly of rose water and thyme. Elena walked over to it, touched it gently, then pressed it to her cheek. Her eyes closed. When she opened them again, she didn't wipe the tears. She let them fall. James stayed at the door, watching, waiting. "Did she ever forgive you?" Elena asked. He didn't answer right away. "I think she wanted to," he said finally. "But I gave her no chance. I was too proud, too broken. And when I was ready to be better, she was already gone." Elena turned. "But you're here now." He nodded slowly. "I want to do what I can with whatever time I have left." She stepped forward, unsure, then wrapped her arms around him. He froze, then melted. It was an embrace that took 20 years to arrive. And it didn't fix everything. It didn't erase the pain, the years, or the absence. But it made room for something new, something possible. That evening, James did something he hadn't done in over 2 decades. He cooked, badly. The rice was burned, and the chicken too salty. But Elena laughed, really laughed, for the first time in years, and he found himself laughing too, with flour on his shirt and a ridiculous apron he'd found buried in a drawer. After dinner, they sat by the window, watching the sunset melt over the skyline. "You know," James said quietly, "I always thought success would look like stock prices and magazine covers, but it's this moment." Elena rested her head lightly on his shoulder. "And it's only the beginning," she said. Days passed, then weeks. The city didn't change, but everything in their world did. James set up a scholarship fund in his wife's name, for girls like Elena, for those who cleaned graves and carried secrets and waited for someone to notice. He made weekly visits to the cemetery, not because he had to, but because he finally wanted to. And every Sunday, he and Elena would sit in the room that once belonged to her mother, reading through the old journals, laughing at the notes in the margins, learning the woman who had connected their lives in silence. On a bright morning months later, James stood at the same cemetery bench with Elena. She had placed a new necklace on the grave, one identical to the one her mother had given her, now kept in a frame beside her bed. James placed a rose beside it and whispered, "Thank you for giving me a second chance through her." As they walked away, hands lightly brushing, the camera would pull back, fading slowly from the garden to the city skyline as the sun broke through the clouds. And in that soft golden light, a voice would echo, "Life doesn't always give you do-overs, but sometimes love does." And for them, that was enough. Past redeemed, family reborn, and a future full of hope. 10 years had passed since the day that changed everything. The old mansion, once echoing with silence and regret, was now filled with laughter and warmth. Morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting a soft golden glow across the marble floors and antique furniture. The scent of lavender drifted from the garden, where fresh blooms were lovingly tended, just as Emily had once dreamed. In the heart of the living room, beneath a grand chandelier, James stood tall. A little older, a little slower, but infinitely more alive. His silver hair had thinned, but his eyes, once cold and hollow, now shimmered with gentle warmth as he watched the 2 girls he once thought he'd never have. Chloe and Lily were no longer the frail, quiet twins who'd placed wildflowers on a forgotten grave. At 18, they radiated life. Chloe, the quieter of the 2, had inherited Emily's grace. She moved like a whisper, thoughtful and kind. Lily, bold and curious, had James's intensity, though softened by the love he'd poured into raising her. They were preparing for college now. Chloe would study art history, chasing a passion that blossomed in the mansion's gallery. Lily, ever the firecracker, had earned a scholarship in biomedical engineering. James couldn't be prouder. They had grown under his care, but more than that, he had grown because of them. Every Sunday morning, without fail, the 3 of them still visited the cemetery. Emily's grave was no longer lonely or overgrown. It was the most lovingly maintained spot in the entire cemetery. There was a new headstone, carved in white marble, etched with roses and the words, "Emily Grace, beloved mother, cherished forever." Next to it, a second space had been reserved. James had chosen it years ago, quietly, without ceremony. It wasn't about preparing for death. It was about being close to the only woman who had ever truly seen him. As they arrived that day, Chloe stepped forward first. She knelt beside the grave and placed a fresh bouquet of lilacs, the same flowers her mother had once adored. Lily followed, lighting the small solar lantern they kept by the stone. Its glow soft even under the morning sun. James stood behind them, holding his cane loosely, watching. The sun warmed his back, and a breeze stirred the old oak branches above. 10 years, Chloe whispered, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Sometimes it still feels like yesterday. Lily smiled gently. And sometimes like a lifetime ago. They turned back toward him. Dad, Chloe said softly, we were thinking, maybe next Sunday we could bring a few of our college friends, just to show them. Tell the story. James nodded slowly. Of course, he replied. His voice, once so commanding in boardrooms and interviews, now held the softness of a man who had learned what truly mattered. Let them know what kind of woman your mother was. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small silver heart-shaped necklace. Emily's necklace. Though he had replaced the chain many times over the years, he still kept the original pendant, now polished and glowing under the light. This started everything, he said quietly. Lily smiled. No, Dad, you did. As they turned to leave the cemetery, James felt it again, the pull of the past and the comfort of the present. For the first time in decades, he wasn't haunted by memories. He was accompanied by them. Back at the mansion, the staff had changed. James no longer had an entourage, just a housekeeper who was more like family, and a part-time gardener who had once been a homeless man James helped off the street. He'd changed his will too. Most of his wealth would go toward a foundation Emily had once spoken of, one that supported single mothers and orphan children. He walked slower now, but with more purpose. That evening, as the city skyline shimmered under the setting sun, James sat on the balcony with a warm drink in hand. Below, he could hear the twins laughing as they packed for their upcoming semester. The sound filled the empty spaces inside him, ones that used to echo with guilt and grief. He looked at the framed photo on the table beside him. Emily, smiling, holding their newborn twins. The photo that had once broken him, now mended him. He touched the frame gently. I kept my promise, he murmured. They're safe, they're strong, and they know who you were. In the distance, church bells rang. A soft, melodic chime that floated through the air like a lullaby. And in that golden hour, 10 years after a necklace had reopened the wounds of a long-buried past, James finally felt whole. He was no longer just a man with money and regret. He was a father. He was a husband in memory. And above all, he was a man redeemed, not by wealth, not by legacy, but by love, and the two girls who had reminded him what it meant to be human. The old mansion, once echoing with silence and regret, was now filled with laughter and warmth. Morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting a soft golden glow across the marble floors and antique furniture. The scent of lavender drifted from the garden, where fresh blooms were lovingly tended, just as Emily had once dreamed. In the heart of the living room, beneath a grand chandelier, James stood tall. A little older, a little slower, but infinitely more alive. His silver hair had thinned, but his eyes, once cold and hollow, now shimmered with gentle warmth as he watched the two girls he once thought he'd never have. Chloe and Lily were no longer the frail, quiet twins who'd placed wildflowers on a forgotten grave. At 18, they radiated life. Chloe, the quieter of the two, had inherited Emily's grace. She moved like a whisper, thoughtful and kind. Lily, bold and curious, had James's intensity, though softened by the love he'd poured into raising her. They were preparing for college now. Chloe would study art history, chasing a passion that blossomed in the mansion's gallery. Lily, ever the firecracker, had earned a scholarship in biomedical engineering. James couldn't be prouder. They had grown under his care, but more than that, he had grown because of them. Every Sunday morning, without fail, the three of them still visited the cemetery. Emily's grave was no longer lonely or overgrown. It was the most lovingly maintained spot in the entire cemetery. There was a new headstone, carved in white marble, etched with roses and the words, "Emily Grace, beloved mother, cherished forever." Next to it, a second space had been reserved. James had chosen it years ago, quietly, without ceremony. It wasn't about preparing for death. It was about being close to the only woman who had ever truly seen him. As they arrived that day, Chloe stepped forward first. She knelt beside the grave and placed a fresh bouquet of lilacs, the same flowers her mother had once adored. Lily followed, lighting the small solar lantern they kept by the stone. Its glow soft even under the morning sun. James stood behind them, holding his cane loosely, watching. The sun warmed his back, and a breeze stirred the old oak branches above. 10 years, Chloe whispered, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Sometimes it still feels like yesterday. Lily smiled gently. And sometimes like a lifetime ago. They turned back toward him. Dad, Chloe said softly. We were thinking, maybe next Sunday we could bring a few of our college friends, just to show them. Tell the story. James nodded slowly. Of course, he replied. His voice, once so commanding in boardrooms and interviews, now held the softness of a man who had learned what truly mattered. Let them know what kind of woman your mother was. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small silver heart-shaped necklace. Emily's necklace. Though he had replaced the chain many times over the years, he still kept the original pendant, now polished and glowing under the light. This started everything, he said quietly. Lily smiled. No, Dad, you did. As they turned to leave the cemetery, James felt it again, the pull of the past and the comfort of the present. For the first time in decades, he wasn't haunted by memories. He was accompanied by them. Back at the mansion, the staff had changed. James no longer had an entourage, just a housekeeper who was more like family, and a part-time gardener who had once been a homeless man James helped off the street. He'd changed his will too. Most of his wealth would go toward a foundation Emily had once spoken of, one that supported single mothers and orphan children. He walked slower now, but with more purpose. That evening, as the city skyline shimmered under the setting sun, James sat on the balcony with a warm drink in hand. Below, he could hear the twins laughing as they packed for their upcoming semester. The sound filled the empty spaces inside him, ones that used to echo with guilt and grief. He looked at the framed photo on the table beside him. Emily, smiling, holding their newborn twins. The photo that had once broken him, now mended him. He touched the frame gently. I kept my promise, he murmured. They're safe, they're strong, and they know who you were. In the distance, church bells rang. A soft, melodic chime that floated through the air like a lullaby. And in that golden hour, 10 years after a necklace had reopened the wounds of a long-buried past, James finally felt whole. He was no longer just a man with money and